The night London remembered most began beneath a canopy of trembling chandeliers, when candlelight shivered like breath upon crystal and violins wept for love long dead. Snow pressed against the tall windows of Devonshire House, whitening the world beyond and sealing the city in a hush that made scandal sound louder. Within, the season had opened in defiance of hardship, silks against hunger, champagne against despair. And amid that fragile glitter stood Lady Eleanor Pembroke, whose very stillness seemed an act of courage. Her gown, pale rose with a fading hem, bore the quiet mark of a seamstress's careful alterations. Few noticed such things, yet in the merciless eyes of London's ton, a reworked dress was confession enough. Her father's influence, once formidable in Parliament, had waned since his ill-fated quarrel with the late Duke of Winthrop. The Pembrokes were still invited everywhere, but they were no longer quite welcome. Eleanor had learned to move through the crush of conversation as one might through frost, each breath careful, each step preserving dignity before it cracked. That evening she sought no more than a moment of peace. Her fiancé, Lord Halbridge, had promised to announce their wedding date. She believed it would silence the whispers that followed her name like shadows. Yet as the orchestra swelled, she saw him approach, not with tenderness, but with that air of hesitant cruelty peculiar to cowards who know they are about to wound. "Lady Eleanor," he said, bowing low enough to appear gallant, though his words were sharpened by rehearsed indifference. "Circumstances compel me to relinquish our understanding. Your family's situation renders further alliance imprudent." A silence fell about them, spreading like ink through linen. The Countess of Dorling turned her head, a fan stilled in the air. Eleanor's lips parted, but no sound came. She curtsied, as custom demanded, though she felt her knees weaken beneath the weight of humiliation. "I wish you happiness, my lord," she said at last, her voice even, her heart in shards. Halbridge bowed again, relieved that she had not made a scene. He turned away. The orchestra played on, and the laughter resumed, low, poisoned, intimate. It was at that instant the doors opened to admit him. The Duke of Winthrop had returned from the continent, and with him came a silence more complete than any music could fill. Tall, severe, wrapped in black as if still in mourning, Adrian Blackwell surveyed the room with eyes the color of stormed steel. Rumor claimed he had fought in Spain, lost friends in the mud of Waterloo, and inherited both title and scandal upon his father's death. None dared speak of the trial that had destroyed his family's name, save that it had been the work of Sir Reginald Pembroke, Eleanor's father. Now, that same Pembroke's daughter stood abandoned in the center of the ballroom, her reputation bleeding quietly into the marble floor. Adrian saw her. A flicker, something between satisfaction and surprise, crossed his expression. Fate, it seemed, had a sense of symmetry. He moved forward through the crowd with the easy authority of a man accustomed to obedience. Conversations broke off, heads turned. When he reached her, he bowed, perfectly, precisely, and extended his hand. "Lady Eleanor," he said, his voice low, each word weighed as though it cost him to speak. "Would you honor me with this dance?" She hesitated. Every gaze in the room pressed upon her. To refuse would confirm her ruin. To accept, invite a different kind of peril. Yet his eyes held no mockery, only a terrible calm, as if her answer had already been foretold. "I should be honored, Your Grace," she murmured, placing her hand in his. His glove was cold. The waltz began. They moved together across the polished floor, two exiles bound by circumstance. She felt his power in the precision of his steps, the measured restraint of a soldier still unlearning command. He watched her not as a suitor, but as one might study the enemy's line, searching for weakness, for truth. "You bear yourself bravely," he said quietly, as they turned beneath the chandelier. "I have little choice," she replied. "The world is fond of watching when one falls." A faint smile touched his mouth. "Indeed, yet sometimes it is useful to let them see only what one allows." She looked up, startled by the odd gentleness beneath his words. There was, she thought, pain in his gaze, old, disciplined but alive. And though she could not have named it, he too felt the first strain of doubt. The vengeance he had carried across borders had never envisioned her. As the dance ended, applause scattered through the hall, uncertain whether it mocked or admired. Adrian inclined his head, releasing her hand with deliberate care. "Courage," he said softly, so low that only she could hear. "It will serve you better than love." Then he was gone, disappearing into the sea of faces, leaving her trembling and bewildered. Around her, the music swelled again, though she could no longer hear it. She stood where he had left her, breathing the faint scent of his presence, smoke, leather, and something colder still. Across the room, whispers began anew. "The cold Duke has returned. He danced with the disgraced Pembroke girl." He smiled. By the time Eleanor reached her carriage, snow was falling thickly. The world beyond the lamps blurred into pale silence. Inside the carriage, she allowed herself one tear. It fell upon her glove, darkening the silk, vanishing as quickly as it came. Far above the city, smoke curled from the chimneys of Winthorpe House. Adrian stood before his window, watching the storm gather. He told himself that he had merely taken the first move in a game long overdue, that the Pembrokes' downfall would be the last chapter of his father's humiliation. Yet beneath that cold conviction stirred something unwelcome, a memory of how her voice had not broken when it should have, how she had met shame with grace rather than fury. He poured a measure of brandy and let it burn down his throat, as though it might cauterize the thought. Outside, the snow thickened, whispering against the glass. In every revenge, there is a moment when the heart pauses, unsure whether it pursues justice or merely shadows. For the Duke of Winthorpe, that hesitation had begun, quiet as a single tear upon silk, unseen but already unstoppable. The days following the Devonshire ball unfolded beneath a sky of unrelenting gray. London, weary from war and winter, seemed to mirror the bitterness within its grandest houses. In drawing rooms perfumed with fading roses, whispers of Lady Eleanor Pembroke's disgrace bloomed like frostbite, beautiful at a distance, deadly upon touch. Gentlemen pitied her with condescension. Ladies pitied her with delight. Yet amid the gossip's cruelty, one name began to surface beside hers, the Duke of Winthorpe. Adrian had not expected that a single dance would suffice to bind her fate to his. Yet society's hunger for narrative had done his work for him. Now her name was spoken with his in every salon and supper hall, tethered by rumor and speculation. The Pembrokes, cornered by scandal, sought salvation in the very man who had engineered their ruin. It was almost poetic, he thought, his father's destroyer forced to seek alliance with the son. When Sir Reginald Pembroke's invitation arrived, Adrian's amusement was tempered only by irony. He accepted, knowing precisely what the meeting would yield. The Pembroke townhouse in Grosvenor Square bore the marks of former grandeur, the carpets worn thin, the silver unpolished. Sir Reginald greeted him with the careful politeness of a man both proud and desperate. Eleanor was present, standing by the fire, her composure so precise it might have been armor. "Your Grace," she said softly, curtsying with grace that cost her dearly. "Lady Eleanor." His bow was measured, his tone unreadable. "It seems society has grown imaginative." "Society grows imaginative when it is bored," she replied, meeting his gaze. "I am its latest amusement." Her father cleared his throat, unable to bear the sharpness of her honesty. "I need not speak in circles, Your Grace. You know the position we find ourselves in. If some understanding might be arranged between our families," his voice faltered. Adrian's expression did not change. "You refer to marriage, I presume." Eleanor's head turned sharply toward him, but he did not look her way. "A union," Sir Reginald stammered, "would quiet talk, restore propriety, and redeem your daughter's name," Adrian finished. The words hung in the air like smoke. Eleanor's color drained, yet she did not retreat. "You speak as though I were a debt to be repaid," she said. His gaze shifted to hers, steady and cold. "Perhaps we are all debts, Lady Eleanor, owed to the choices of our fathers." The silence that followed was suffocating. At last, Sir Reginald murmured agreement, too aware of his own guilt to protest. The Duke left shortly thereafter, his offer made, his victory complete, or so he believed. That evening, a small box arrived at the Pembroke house. Within lay a pendant of silver and onyx, engraved with the crest of Winthorpe. No letter accompanied it, only the Duke's card. Eleanor traced the crest with her fingertip, uncertain whether it signified protection or possession. Still, when her father insisted she accept the proposal, she did not resist. Some part of her, quiet, exhausted, had ceased to believe her own will mattered. Their betrothal announcement was made public within the week. The ton erupted in fascination. Some called it charity, others strategy. The Pembrokes appeared restored to favor, and the Duke's cold nobility gained an aura of chivalry. Yet beneath the civility of printed congratulations ran a current of disbelief. Why would the most formidable man in England wed a ruined girl? Adrian read the papers with grim satisfaction. Each whisper of admiration toward him was another blow against the Pembroke name, another echo of the vengeance he had nurtured for years. But when he thought of Eleanor's pale composure during their meeting, the dignity she maintained despite her father's trembling, something within him had shifted, faint as the first thaw beneath ice. Their next encounter occurred beneath a slate-colored sky. She had requested to see him before the formal announcement ball, and he granted it, curious. The meeting took place in the park, discreet and unchaperoned save for the chill wind that cut between them. "You have been kind to offer me restoration, your grace," she began, her voice calm though her gloves trembled slightly at the fingertips. "Yet I must know your motive, for I sense little affection in your manner." He regarded her for a long moment. "Affection, Lady Eleanor, is the luxury of the unruined. I offer you something more reliable, security." She smiled faintly, bitterly. "And you, my lord? What do you gain?" "Peace," he said, though even as he spoke the word, it rang hollow. Rain began to fall, soft and relentless. She tilted her face upward, letting the drops cool her flushed skin. "Then let us make peace together, even if it is built upon silence." He had no answer for that. The carriage was called, and she left him standing in the rain, unsettled for reasons he refused to name. Days later, they were wed in a ceremony as brief as it was restrained. London applauded the union as a triumph of grace over scandal, though few failed to note that the bride wore no jewels and the groom no smile. At Winthorpe Manor, the new duchess took her place within walls that still smelled faintly of neglect. She found solace among the estate's wounded veterans, men the Duke had brought from the wars and kept in quiet employ. She read to them, mended their uniforms, and walked the frozen fields beside their cottages. Word of her kindness spread among the servants, and even the Duke's steward found himself speaking of her with respect. Adrian watched her from a distance, torn between irritation and intrigue. Her gentleness unsettled him. Her quietness was not submission, but strength disguised as patience. When he passed her in the corridors, she always curtsied with formal grace, and he responded with curt civility. Their marriage existed in the precise tension between duty and denial. One evening, as the firelight danced across the study shelves, he found upon his desk a letter, unsigned but written in a hand he now recognized. "If you should ever wish to speak as husband to wife, I would listen, not as your equal, for I cannot be, but as one who wishes to understand." He folded it without reading further, yet the words clung to him like the scent of her perfume, soft, persistent, unyielding. Outside, a storm gathered above the moors. The Duke sat alone, the pendant she wore glinting faintly in his thoughts, the symbol of a bond forged for vengeance, but awakening something perilously close to remorse. And though he told himself that compassion was weakness, he could not escape the quiet truth. He had begun to envy the peace she offered freely to others, and to wonder what price his vengeance might yet demand. Winter tightened its grip upon Winthorpe Manor, wrapping the estate in a silence so complete that even the ravens ceased their cries. The marriage of the Duke and Duchess, barely a month old, had settled into an uneasy civility, two figures bound by oath and distance, sharing the same roof, but not the same heart. The servants spoke in whispers of their lord's coldness, and of how her grace, though gentle, seemed to bloom only in solitude. The grand house had become a theater of restraint, where every word and gesture was measured, where kindness was rationed like candlelight. Eleanor rose each morning before dawn, preferring the company of mist and birds to the heavy quiet of the breakfast room. She visited the cottages of the wounded men, bringing broth, books, and the comfort of conversation. They adored her for it, and in their gratitude she found purpose, something to steady her against the chill of her husband's indifference. Yet even as she smiled among them, she felt the weight of his absence like a presence that never left her side. Adrian watched her from the shadows of his study, unseen but not unmoved. Each report from his steward of her visits to the village unsettled him in ways he could not name. He had expected resentment from her, perhaps tears or pride, not this quiet goodness that asked for nothing. It disarmed him. She had become a mirror reflecting what he feared most. That vengeance, once sweet, had soured into emptiness. Their exchanges at dinner were brief, polite, and excruciatingly civil. She spoke of the veteran's progress. He responded with cool acknowledgement. But one night, when the fire burned low and the storm pressed hard against the windows, she asked softly, "Do you ever tire of silence, my lord?" He looked up from his glass. "Silence is the only honest companion left to me." "Then perhaps you have kept company with it too long," she replied, her tone not accusing but weary. "One begins to mistake it for peace." Her words lingered after she retired, haunting the corners of his thoughts. That night he dreamt of his father's trial. The jeers, the verdict, the slow ruin of their name. He woke before dawn, his breath ragged, and went to the window. Snow fell thickly over the fields, covering all traces of the past day. For a fleeting instant, he envied the snow, its mercy. By afternoon, Eleanor had learned from a maid that he intended to leave for London on business. She found him in the library, arranging correspondence. The air smelled of parchment and rain-soaked wool. "You are leaving?" she said. "For a time," he replied, not looking up. "Will you return?" He paused. "Do you wish me to?" She hesitated, her composure fragile as spun glass. "I wish for truth, your grace. I cannot bear this half-life between us. If I have offended you, I would make amends. If not, then tell me what crime I stand accused of." He set down the papers slowly, meeting her gaze for the first time in weeks. "You have committed none," he said. "The crime is mine." "Then name it," she whispered. He turned away, his voice hardening against its own weakness. "It began long before you. My father died in disgrace, condemned by lies your father helped weave. Everything I am, every shadow you see, was born of that betrayal. When I returned, I swore that the name Pembroke would learn what ruin felt like." Her breath caught. "And I were to be the instrument," he finished quietly. The silence that followed was heavier than any storm. She steadied herself on the edge of the desk, her face pale but unbroken. "Then I am your vengeance," she said at last, "and our vows, your weapon." He flinched, the words striking deeper than he expected. "It was meant to be justice," he said hoarsely. "No," she replied, her voice trembling but clear. "Justice mends. What you sought was to wound. And yet, in wounding me, you have harmed only yourself." For the first time, she saw the flicker of something human in his eyes. Regret, fragile and unguarded. He crossed the space between them, then stopped short, uncertain. "If my suffering could restore your father's name, I would offer it," she said softly. "But hatred cannot resurrect the dead. It only buries the living beside them." She left the room without another word. That night, he sat before the fire, the flames reflected in the decanter beside him. Her voice would not leave him. He thought of her tending to the wounded, her hands steady, her eyes kind. He thought of his father's last letter, long hidden in his desk, a plea for forgiveness, not vengeance. He opened it for the first time since the burial and read until the words blurred with his tears. When dawn came, He fed the letter and the documents that condemned the Pembrokes to the fire, watching the paper curl and vanish. Later, as snow fell upon the courtyard, Eleanor found him outside, coat unfastened, breath ghosting in the cold. "You will make yourself ill," she said, stepping nearer. "I thought I had already made myself everything ill could make of a man," he answered quietly. Something in his tone softened her. "Then start anew, Adrian," she said, using his name for the first time. "Begin with truth." He looked at her, astonished by the tenderness in her voice. "Truth," he echoed. "That we are both broken," she said, "but perhaps not beyond repair." For a moment, neither moved. Then he bowed his head, not in victory but surrender. "You are a cruel healer, my lady," he murmured, "for you make a man long for what he does not deserve." She smiled faintly, tears brightening her eyes. "Deserving has little to do with it." The wind rose, carrying the scent of snow and ash between them. He reached for her hand, brushed it with his lips, and let it fall. When he spoke again, his voice was scarcely more than a vow. "I will go to London," he said, "not to destroy, but to make right what I can." She nodded, though her heart trembled with dread and hope alike. As his carriage rolled away the next morning, Eleanor stood upon the steps, her cloak whipping in the wind. Somewhere deep within her, love had begun, quiet, reluctant, and utterly beyond her will. And as the horizon swallowed him, she understood that forgiveness, once given, could no longer be reclaimed. Spring arrived late that year, as if uncertain whether England deserved renewal. The gray veil of winter thinned, revealing fragile buds along the hedgerows and the faintest scent of thawing earth. At Winthorpe Manor, sunlight once more touched the windows, though its master had not yet returned. Weeks had passed since the Duke's departure for London, and with each day's silence, Eleanor's resolve wavered between hope and dread. She continued her visits to the cottages, but her smiles grew distracted. When she read to the soldiers, her voice faltered at passages of forgiveness. Even the servants, once cautious in her presence, now spoke softly of her loneliness. One evening, as she walked the gardens at dusk, the butler approached with a sealed letter. The wax bore the crest of the Duke of Winthorpe, though the edges were smudged, as if handled too often. She opened it with trembling hands. His words were few but precise. "I intend to make my account public. When next you hear my name, it shall be in truth, not rumor. Whatever may come, remember that it was your courage that taught me to see." It was signed simply, Adrian. She pressed the paper to her chest, torn between pride and fear. London could be merciless. To admit deceit before Parliament, before the very world that thrived on scandal, was to risk not only disgrace but ruin. Yet she knew his intent was sincere. He meant to free her from the shadow he had cast. That knowledge did not ease her heart. It only deepened her love. In London, the season's final ball was to be held at Carlton House under the patronage of the Prince Regent himself. The newspapers promised spectacle, glittering uniforms, imported champagne, a ballroom illuminated by 1,000 candles. Unseen amid the preparations, the Duke of Winthorpe readied a different kind of performance. The confession he would make that night would either restore his family's honor or destroy it forever. He had already dismissed his lawyers, burned his father's remaining papers, and written letters to every man once complicit in the old corruption. When he looked into the mirror, he saw not vengeance, but weariness, and the faint reflection of the woman whose mercy had undone him. The night of the ball unfolded in brilliance. Music swelled through the palace, echoing off gold and marble. London's finest gathered, their laughter carrying the brittle edge of expectation. When Adrian entered, conversation faltered. His reputation, icy, untouchable, preceded him, and whispers rippled through the assembly like the rustle of silk. Some claimed he had returned to announce political ambition. Others murmured that his wife remained in exile, too ashamed to appear. But Eleanor was there. She had come quietly, without fanfare, wearing a gown of soft silver that caught the light like frost. Though she stood at the edge of the room, her presence did not go unnoticed. She had come not for spectacle, but to witness truth. When Adrian mounted the steps to address the gathered company, the room fell into breathless stillness. His voice, calm yet raw, carried through the hall. "My lords and ladies," he began, "you know my name, though not my heart. For years, I believed my father's ruin was the fault of another man, a man I swore to punish. In that belief, I wronged an innocent, and in seeking justice, I became the very cruelty I despised." A murmur spread, quickly silenced by his raised hand. "The Pembroke name bears no guilt in the fall of Winthrop. The lies were mine to perpetuate, and I will bear their weight alone. I ask no forgiveness from society, for it has none to give. But I ask forgiveness from the woman whose grace redeemed me from hatred itself." Every gaze turned toward Eleanor. She stood still, her hands clasped tightly before her, her eyes glistening with unfallen tears. The Prince Regent inclined his head in astonishment, and the orchestra, uncertain, ceased entirely. Adrian descended the steps and crossed the marble floor. His words reached her through the hush. "My lady," he said, his voice low but steady, "I have nothing left to offer you. No title untainted, no wealth unsullied, no promise unbroken. Yet if you can bear to stand beside me, not as recompense, but as choice, I would begin again, this time in truth." Eleanor's lips trembled, yet her gaze did not waver. "You speak of forgiveness, your grace," she said softly. "Then let us both grant it and live rather than linger in the past." He bowed his head, emotion unmasked, and took her hand. Gasps rippled through the hall, followed by applause, tentative at first, then swelling into genuine admiration. What had begun as scandal ended in something rarer, sincerity. Outside, rain began to fall, soft as blessing. As they waltzed, the crowd melted away, leaving only the music and the sound of rain against glass. He held her carefully, as though she were something fragile and sacred. "I thought I knew what strength was," he murmured, "but it was you all along." She smiled faintly. "And I thought love was the prize of the blameless. Now I see it belongs to those who dare to mend." The orchestra reached its final refrain. He drew her closer, his hand trembling where it rested against her back. "Eleanor," he whispered, "you have undone a war I thought eternal. And you," she said, "have made peace worth believing in." When the music faded, they stood for a moment in stillness. Beyond the windows, the first true petals of spring trembled upon the air, carried by a wind that smelled of rain and renewal. The Duke of Winthrop had come to the ballroom, seeking absolution, and found instead a future. History would remember the confession, but not the look that passed between them, the quiet miracle of two souls unburdened. And as they stepped into the night, their carriage waiting amid the drizzle, the city lights reflected in the wet cobblestones like stars fallen to earth. He helped her inside, their hands entwined. The door closed softly behind them, shutting out the noise of the world. For the first time, his silence was no longer a fortress but a promise, and her tears were not of sorrow, but of peace. And as the carriage rolled into the misted streets, the Duke who had sought revenge carried instead the heart he had thought forever lost, its pulse steady and alive beside the woman who had taught him to forgive.